And hello everyone on this very fine Tuesday. Welcome to the Deleuze and Guattari Quarantine Collective's ongoing reading of Anti-Oedipus. If it seems like I've been hitting the head a few times with a brick, it's because I feel like I have. I was up all night last night. It's a very long story. And when you're old, that stuff matters. We've ended, as of our reading on this last Saturday, which last Tuesday, we also got only one paragraph from the end. I didn't realize we're at the very end of the destructive task of schizoanalysis. So we are going to just straight move into the first positive task of schizoanalysis and make our way through in that way. Let's see. That's kind of about it. I don't have a ton else to add in the majority here. We're going to give people a chance to join. I know it's our usual time. We're starting up. I wonder where everyone is. Interesting. One of those days. But for the time being, we are going to dive in, start reading, and make our way through the first positive task of schizoanalysis, and maybe to even the end of our third reading of the book, so we can start a fourth. So without further ado, I will jump straight to it. The negative or destructive task of schizoanalysis is in no way separable from its positive tasks. All these tasks are necessarily undertaken at the same time. The first positive task consists of discovering in a subject the nature, the formation, or the functioning of his desiring machines, independently of any interpretations. What are your desiring machines? What do you put into these machines? What is the output? How does it work? What are your non-human sexes? The schizoanalyst is a mechanic, and schizoanalysis is solely functional. In this respect, it cannot remain at the level of a still interpretive examination, interpretive from the point of view of the unconscious, of the social machines in which the subject is caught as a cog or a user, nor of the technical machines that are his prized possession, or that he perfects or even produces through handiwork, nor of the subject's use of his machines in his dreams and fantasies. These machines are still too representative, and represent units that are too large. Even the perverted machines of the sadist or the masochist, even the influencing machines of the paranoiac. We have seen in general that the pseudo-analyses of the object were really the lowest level of analytic activity, even and especially when they claim to double the real object with an imaginary object. And better, a How to Interpret Your Dreams book than a psychoanalysis of the marketplace. When we start talking about what is schizoanalysis, it's intended very much to be an evolution, a critique, a growth of psychoanalysis. There's a reason that they didn't create a wholly new word. There's a reason that they're building on a lot of sort of Lacanian concepts and directions, especially Guattari and his work. The way they're going about it, they open up with the first destructive task. The task is ultimately about the destruction of representations, more or less. I'm oversimplifying. There's a reason they wrote a whole chapter. It is actually kind of ultimately complex and kind of a lot to get through. But the first positive task, they want to make sure that they don't, again, like most of the things in their book, we don't consider it as fully separate or its own task, and a thing that is done sort of on its own. We go step 1, step 2, step 3, as if it's this incredibly orderly process. It is not. It is similar to the syntheses, similar to the way that essentially their entire ontology operates. There is no moment where you're doing only this thing. This is part of the process. It's part of schizoanalysis as they are seeing it. The nature of this and what they're playing with it is effectively trying to move away from a very traditional psychoanalytic view where we have the Oedipalizing structure. This is dismantling it, but at the same time, as we dismantle, we're doing the positive task, which is looking for and trying to find exactly how desire is functioning. What is the functive element? What is the focal point, the indices, as they were talking about in the previous section? So when we start talking about sort of these elements and how they come together, it is about breaking down Oedipal symbolism, about breaking down representational spaces, but very much enabling the person to start sharing and opening up about things as they feel them, things as they happen, things as they understand them, and be watching for them, not in terms of an interpretation. Oh, that seems like that's like your dad. No, stop. No. It's feeling that and going there and seeing those as indices themselves, purely functional. They really want us to be talking about the machinic of this. They want us to be looking at us as machinists, as mechanics, as car repairmen, just as much as person repairmen. That it is about, as they say, getting past what they see as things that are too representative. The subject's use of his machines in his dreams and fantasies. These machines, these are too representative, and they represent units still too large. It is not about finding these large aggregates of desiring machines and how they're being used as objectities, but instead to continually break them down, further and further until we get to the machinic themselves. It's a overall sort of, there's a handful of things in here that they're pulling from a few places. Psychoanalysis and the Unconscious from D.H. Lawrence, I'd recommend reading. That's very much going to be sort of throughout this, because his critiques are sort of being used pretty heavily. But very much this opening paragraph is just sort of setting that up in place. And this first positive task is seeing and looking at the indices as a machinic element, not as part of a larger body or larger subject. So following me so far, everyone? I know there's only a couple of you, but that's fine. I want to make sure.
I was kind of curious to ask about the use of technical machines in this paragraph. What are they referring to there?
1 second. Sorry, my brain died. Technical machines. Sorry, I'm not seeing it. God, why is my eye not finding it?
It
so
was
sorry.
It cannot remain at the level of a still interpretive examination.
Oh, yeah.
The social procedure in which the subject is caught as a cog or user, nor of the technical machines that are his prized possession, or that he perfects or even produces through his handiwork.
Yeah. So the phrase that they kind of have a little bit later, the subject's use of machines in his dreams, the line, these machines are still too representative and represent units too large. Technical machines as his prized possessions, the way he has set up his life or has built, like technical machines. When they say technical machines, they mean like in the social world, the social space, actual machines that the guy's built, more or less. How to say it. I lay out my socks in particular ways in the morning. Sounds like it's a shitty example, but it's not far off from what they're talking about. These things themselves are not representative of other elements. Even these, though, are still too large. We're not kind of at this point of finding what technical machine and analyzing the entirety of a technical machine. We're not trying to find the machinery that he's using in a dream, or the odd thing that he's built, the solar anus of sorts in whatever sort of position he's in. These things are still too representative. It's about understanding the interactions of them, the evental nature of them, not them as a singular totality that's sort of transcendent. If that makes sense. The use of technical machine throughout this is really, really complicated and really weird, because it does fuck with, I mean, for me, maybe it's only me, but I find it fucks with kind of my overall grasp of how they're using machinic as a thing, because technical machines tends to sound like machines to me. And it seems like a almost redundancy of terms, but they tend to be meaning it as the machinery, cell phones, as computers, technical machines, things that have been built or systems that have been built by the person, as I understand it. Again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you're talking about like laying your socks out in the morning, do you mean like it could be at the level of like habits or practices or sort of like, I don't know, these structures that people kind of...
Technological arrangements or apparatuses or whatever that sort of exist inside of the social field rather than the molecular field. So the machine of my laying out all my stuff, or having, a cell phone, a bicycle. I really, really like my bicycle. Oh, really? That is still too large. That's a technical machine that is his prized possession. I use bicycle specifically because that's like Malloy from one of their references earlier, but it is not, as they're saying, to sort of maybe build it out a little bit. In this respect, it cannot remain at the level of still interpretive examination. It can't be that you, as the analyst, are actually interpreting for the person, or that you're taking things as having a secondary meaning. Interpretive from point of view of the unconscious. This is kind of the thing of social machines in which the subject is caught as a cog or user. I feel stuck at work. My mom doesn't pay attention to me. The only 3 fucking people show up to my goddamn Anti-Oedipus readings. Whatever it may be, this setup is itself the social machine that I am caught in as a cog or a user. It's also not the technical machines that are my prized possession. I really love my computer. I love my cell phone, these other things. Those are still large objectities that are technical machines. They're in the social world. They're molar, large-scale formations rather than molecular indices, which is what they're trying to get us to look at. They really don't want people to get stuck on, because it's a thing they talk about in a handful of other places. People did get stuck on like, oh, well, people's machines then are the big deal. No, that's not the deal for them. They're not like, oh, look, you're just a machine and so is everything else. So all the machines that are around you, we can interpret and take that way. They're saying, no, it's not the technical machines that are in this molar space that are arrangements of machinery. It's not that. It's also not the subject's use of machines in my dreams and fantasies. That's also not what we're doing. All of these machines themselves are too representative. They represent units too large. We have seen in general that the pseudo-analyses of objects were really the lowest level of analytic activity, even and especially when they claim to double the real object with an imaginary object. And better a How to Interpret Your Dreams book than a psychoanalysis of the marketplace. That last line I've never liked. I don't fully grasp, actually, because it feels opposite. But technical machines are machines that are molar, larger scale, not molecular.
Thanks.
I think it's again, this is how I've read it. I know I'm not alone in this, but it's the use of technical machines. They only have a handful of times in the book, so it's kind of a weird one. I hope that made more sense. Sorry. So it's a whole thing. Not that I like to bring up 1,000 Plateaus. I really, really don't. But they spend a lot of time in Mille Plateau going over sort of the machinic nature of things. And it's about the machinic arrangements, which is about desiring machines connecting to technical machines back to desiring machines. So they kind of view technical machines as this molar technical thing, technical object that is, again, at the molar rather than the molecular, which is where they're trying to focus us because we're trying to understand the unconscious and work with the indices and machinery that's there. If that makes sense. Sorry, it's a bit of a ramble.
Appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, I mean, it's one actually worth spending time on, and I may actually this weekend, because it is, their language on a lot of this stuff is just on that edge of like indecipherability. I don't know how else to put it. Like, so it's a good question though. It's a good question for sure. Anyone else got a thing? Because it's an intro paragraph. I'm not expecting it to be wildly deep. But the language that's important to pull away is the first positive task. It's just these two sentences. Consists of discovering in a subject the nature, the formation, or the functioning of his desiring machines, independently of any interpretation. That the sentence, they put the emphasis on his, and I believe it's also in the French as well, because it's very much an awareness that you are not, as the analyst, inserting yourself. His desiring machines, not the analyst desiring machines. This is part of their critique of general psychoanalytic work, is you actually learn a lot more about the analyst than the analyst and in a lot of the analyses. Just like when you read Freud, there's the old joke, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar and sometimes it's a gigantic black dick. That's because that's Freud. Freud was always really in a weird place. So you can learn a lot about Freud through his writings. But this is about the patient, the analysand.
Wait 1 second. Whenever this joke is used, I feel legally obligated to chime in. Freud died of suicide of oral cancer because he took too much cocaine. Okay. The oral thing, because one of my previous analysts used this joke. I fucking hated her.
Well, I'm sorry. I made the joke too, and I probably will make it again because.
Oh no, this is not. I know what you mean by this because you said something else that it could possibly mean, right? But these analysts think that the Freud made the joke, and then they can say, "Oh, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar." And I just feel like, this is one of those things where they're standing directly at the colonizer's perspective. And
for sure. Well, it's actually a George Carlin line. It's a George Carlin line. He's got the big rage right now amongst rich white guys is cigars. You know, Freud said cigars are just a cigar. Well, sometimes it's a big black dick.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I'm a fan of that line. And then he says, he ends it by going, you know what goes great with a cigar? Mouth cancer. It's a good accessory for a cell phone.
it's not just the mouth cancer. It's also the choice by suicide by cocaine. He took too much cocaine to suicide, so he can be
if you're going out, I had a friend who had brain cancer, who was an ex-heroin addict, and he went out one last time. I kind of get it.
Okay. Let's not go there too much, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah. It was a depressing, horrifying thing. People are fascinating, though. Shall we continue to the next paragraph? Unless anyone's got a thing. Excellent. The consideration of all these machines, however, whether they be real, symbolic, or imaginary, must indeed intervene in a specific way, but as functional indices to point us in the direction of the desiring machines, to which these indices are more or less close and affinal. The desiring machines, in fact, are only reached, starting from a certain threshold of dispersion that no longer permits either their imaginary identity or their structural unity to subsist. These instances still belong to the order of interpretation, that is to say, the order of the signified or the signifier. Partial objects are what make up the parts of the desiring machines. Partial objects define the working machine or the working parts, but in a state of dispersion such that one part is continually referring to a part from an entirely different machine, like the red clover and the bumblebee, the wasp, the orchid, the bicycle horn, and the dead rat's ass. Let's not rush to introduce a term that would be like a phallus, structuring the whole and personifying the parts, unifying and totalizing everything. Everywhere there is libido as machine energy. Neither the horn nor the bumblebee have the privilege of being a phallus. The phallus intervenes only in the structural organization and the personal relations deriving from it, where everywhere, like the worker called to war, abandons his machines and sets to fighting for a war trophy that is nothing but a great absence, with one and the same penalty, one and the same ridiculous wound for all, castration. This entire struggle for the phallus, this poorly understood will to power, this anthropomorphic representation of sex, this whole conception of sexuality that horrifies Lawrence precisely because it is no more than a conception, because it is an idea that reason imposes on the unconscious and introduces into the passional sphere, and is not by any means a formation of this sphere. Here is where desire finds itself trapped, specifically limited to human sex, unified and identified in the molar constellation. But the desiring machines live on the contrary. Sorry, that's the completely wrong intonation. But the desiring machines live on the contrary under the order of dispersion of the molecular elements. And one fails to understand the nature and function of partial objects if one does not see therein such elements, rather than parts of even a fragmented whole. As Lawrence said, analysis does not have to do with anything that resembles a concept or a person. The so-called human relations are not involved. Analysis should deal solely, except in its negative task, with the machinic arrangements grasped in the context of their molar dispersion. I like this book. Where do we start? I mean, I feel like this might even be worthwhile doing like a sentence by sentence thing, to be perfectly frank. Some big ideas. Lawrence had no issue being very upfront about his view, particularly that the nature of what reason does, and they use the line in here, that reason imposes ideas on the unconscious, that the unconscious is very free to be connecting partial objects, again, not parts of objects, but literally objects partial, objects that are partial to things, objects that are also themselves partial. It's meant to be a very complicated concept. These are not parts of things. By presuming that they are parts of things, you are already doing the thing by creating the whole thing. Instead, it's spending time really with allowing the partial object to exist and connect as it does. When we have the big concept, when we have the thing, the rule, the formation, the whole, it necessarily conditions all other words that can be said around the thing. It necessarily builds us into a position where, when we talk about sex, we presume human sex, penis and vagina, or whatever it is, but human sex, not the connectivity of things, not the nature of how everything connects. They have this great line at the top where they say, partial objects are what make up the parts of desiring machines. Partial objects define the working machine, or working parts, but in a state of dispersion, such that one part is continually referring to a part from an entirely different machine. The example they give is the wasp and the orchid. I'm going to go through two of the examples. The red clover and bumblebee we can do as well, but wasp and the orchid is a reference they've made here, and they will continue to make elsewhere. Deleuze uses it a lot. There is a wasp that looks very much like an orchid, and an orchid that looks very much like a wasp. And they do this because the wasp goes to basically mate with the orchid, and they don't mate, but the orchid leaves its pollen on the wasp, and the wasp goes and tries to fuck another wasp, which is another orchid, and it pollinates for him. So at what point is the wasp not part of the sexual system of the orchid, or vice versa? At what point is the wasp becoming orchid, or the orchid becoming wasp? These pieces, these parts, the elements of them that are attracted to each other, that are working together, they're not having sex, not as we may describe it, but there is libidinal energy there. There is libidinal as machinic energy there. The bicycle horn in the dead rat's ass is Malloy. I believe it's Malloy. Malloy dies. He's riding around on a bicycle, and he is absolutely one of their subjects of what they called at the time schizophrenia. And he sees everything as connected and connects everything, but it's not that he sees them as part of a necessarily unified whole. The bicycle horn, honk honk, and the dead rat's ass is a line in the book. This is a thing that is in the book, but it's his connection to it. It's not that the bicycle horn means dead rat's ass. The partial objects that make up, the multiplicity that make up the horn and the dead rat's ass to Malloy necessarily connect, but they aren't overlapping. They're parts. They're connecting in pieces almost. As they say, everywhere there is libido as machine energy. Neither the horn nor the bumblebee have the privilege of being a phallus. This becomes their sort of larger critique. But this challenge becomes when we have these larger conceptions, when we force these things to happen, when we tell the worker to go to war and they abandon their machines, fighting a war that is part of a larger story. But ultimately, the ultimate same wound for all is this castration, this entire struggle, this poorly understood will to power, anthropomorphic representation of sex. This whole conception of sexuality horrifies Lawrence precisely because it is no more than a conception. And that conception conditions everything. It conditions everything as you go through. Sorry. And this is, as we're going through and we're talking, just to go back to the opening, the consideration of these machines, the symbolic, imaginary, or real, all of these are machines, can be all of these. And this is a Lacanian sort of comment. It must indeed intervene in a specific way, but as functional indices to point us in the direction of the desiring machines, to which these indices are more or less close and affinal. The symbolic elements, the imaginary elements, the machinery a person makes or has, or what they believe they have, or what they have in their dreams. So these things, these are not useless. They're still as material as anything else. This is a materialist psychiatry. We're not saying there's no such thing as symbols that people have, but it's not that they're a symbol. It's that they are complex whole object machinery that are indicative of the actual functioning. And by following those indices, by seeing how people connect them, what they see as being attracted, what they put in one and what they remove from another, and how they consider these, you can begin seeing how they're connected and making their way to the actual desiring machines. The desiring machines, in fact, are only reached starting from a certain threshold of dispersion that no longer permits either imaginary identity or structural unity to subsist. This instances still belong to the order of interpretation, the order of the signified or the signifier. You start at that position because we use words. They're not, again, we use words to do things. I don't know how else to put it. Like that's the whole of this. They're acknowledging these machines, these symbolic elements are relevant to schizoanalysis. Like flatly, they've not said otherwise through the whole book. They're relevant, but they're not relevant as psychoanalysis considers them. Instead, it's actually as indicators, as pointers, as guiding, or you might say a map of sorts, to find the desiring machines that are operating underneath all of it. These things, depending on the what they do, depending on their attractant, depending on all of their things, by getting towards the desiring machines, you're finding how they connect to the aphenal, to the germinative, to the desiring production underneath all of this. This is the actual operation of desire. Again, they're indicative. They're not the thing, and they're not a symbolic element that's dancing around in the whole thing. If that makes sense. I know that was a little bit longer of a ramble than I probably should have done, but generally speaking, that's really what they're getting at here, is driving us away from this, hey, symbolically, allegorically, we can see that your father is a shepherd of sorts, and he's shepherding you, and you see shepherds as being bad. That's why you hate the guy who owns goats, some other stuff. It doesn't matter. The symbolic element that's at play here is the thing that they're wanting not to toss aside, but to have us recognize, because the way that this operates, the way that the machinic indices work, is through all of this. So the line, these instances still belong to the order of interpretation. That is to say, the order signified or signified. This is the understanding, because this kind of clarifies the idea that imaginary identity or a structural symbolic unity are trapped in the realm of signification necessarily. They're trapped in interpretation. And we're trying to move beyond that. These instances belong there, but we're using them as indices. These things are trapped. They are not the thing. They're not the thing we're driving at. This is why partial objects are important, because the whole objects, the whole bodies, the symbolic elements, these things that are the entirety of the concepts, this is the big deal. This is the big deal. And we need to not see them as totalities and interpret them, as I just did terribly with my shepherd comment. But go read literally anything Freud ever wrote. Go read Lacan. Go read psychoanalysts across the board. They're interpreting the symbolic, which you kind of, again, learn more about the psychoanalyst than the analyst and through that. But it's stepping beyond this and going, hey, these things are trapped there, but this is actually just the indices. We need to move beyond them. The partial objects, as they go into, they are what make up the parts of desiring machines. As partial objects define working machines or working parts, but in a state of dispersion, such that one part is continually referring to a part of an entirely different machine, like red clover, bumblebee, wasp and orchid, bicycle horn, dead rat's ass. There is none of these examples, the wasp and the orchid, even as I describe them, you have them separated as whole symbolic elements that are separate and that you're trying to bring together. Bicycle horn and dead rat's ass. But the reality is that the partial machines, they make up these elements. Partial machines define the working machine or parts, but they do so in a state of dispersion such that one part is continually referring to a part from an entirely different machine. These are always connected in that way. The reference of them, the emphasizing of them, the unexpected connections across multiple domains are built into the way that these things function. But but we shouldn't rush in to introduce a term that would structure a whole, that would personify parts, that would unify and totalize everything. There's the phallus. We shouldn't rush into doing this. That's not really a thing we necessarily need. It's a temptation to have a unifying concept. What is a concept that can say how a thing becomes whole? Oh, well, actually, we should talk about that. We should have I like the whole things. How is it that we have these things that refer to each other, but how do we have the whole things? Oh, if they personify the parts, well, we should have something, maybe a phallus. No. They want us to take a second. Maybe don't jump right into what is a very, very tempting mental condition to do, because we want to build a coherent structure. This is, again, part of the same problem. This is the thing psychoanalysis has done. This is structuralist psychoanalysis. And they are like, hey, take a second. You don't really have to do that. Let's instead not talk about libido as this thing born of the phallus or these other elements or desire. Like, no, let's talk about this libido as machinic energy, a mechanical energy that's present through all connections. Getting rid of this privilege of the phallus, getting rid of that element. The phallus itself really only appears when we have organized structures, when we have a personal identity. The example of the military metaphor that they use, like a worker called to war, abandoning machines, sets to fighting a war trophy, is nothing but a great absence with one and the same penalty, one ridiculous wound for all. They use allegory very little in this book. This seems to me like a very solid version of it. The worker at war, producing for his country, his factory, whatever it is, he's making stuff. And now off he goes. Get the fuck out. We just have an emptiness now. An emptiness. He goes, fights a war for a trophy that is nothing but a great absence. He hasn't produced anything in that time. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He's been destructive. He's been not doing much. There's one and the same penalty, one and the same ridiculous wound for all. This castration anxiety that comes with all of that. The same wound we all return with, the neurosis of castration. And that's the line here, this entire struggle for the phallus. The poorly understood will to power. They're giving a bunch of stuff here. They're kind of shitting on a whole bunch of different people at once, saying you don't understand it. All of these things, the struggle for the phallus, this poorly understood will to power, this anthropomorphic representation of sex, this whole conception of sexuality that horrifies Lawrence precisely because it is no more than a conception. It's an idea reason imposes on the unconscious, introduces into the passional sphere, and is not by any means a formation of the sphere. Here is where desire finds itself trapped, specifically limited to human sex, unified and identified in a molar constellation. This trap of desire at the base of it. But that's not a thing for them. We've done that. Desire itself, though, desire machines, they live under the order of dispersion. These whole bodies, these are abstractions that have been created, whole bodies that have been invented by the process of representation and by the way that Oedipus operates within us, the way within which capital sort of works within us. The representational space is given to us. And here is actually what's going on. The desire machines themselves, they live, on the contrary, under the order of dispersion of the molecular elements. Desire machines aren't in the symbols. That's where the dispersion may be done, but they're underneath this. And ultimately, one fails to understand the nature and function of partial objects if one does not see therein such elements, rather than parts of even a fragmented whole. I brought up last week, and I probably will end up doing it a lot through the rest of this book. If you haven't read In Search of Lost Time, Proustian Signs is a great sort of secondary take on it, like, for sure. I mean, it's Deleuze talking about Proust and Signs. But it's also earlier in the book, The Whole in Its Parts, the section titled that. There's a weird thing about Proust and In Search of Lost Time, that the books are effectively like not really a single cohesive book. If I were to talk about The Expanse, which is a great sci-fi series I love, I can kind of summarize the whole thing around the nature of how, mankind disperses itself and then ultimately rebels against itself as we find ever grander ways to expand in the universe. You can find ways to summarize. In Search of Lost Time is like not a thing you can summarize. And actually, if you take any of the single books, they're not really a part of the entire thing. They are, absolutely. Swan's Way is the first book in the series. But you can't really do that. It's not, oh, here's the first book. Oh, end of section 1. Oh, I get it. This is where the direction's going. No. Each of the stories in it, each of the books themselves are themselves partial. They're partial objects, partial books, you might say. Not really parts of a whole. It's hard to do it to explain it without reading it. But there's a lot like this. It doesn't really work as, it's the first part. Sort of, because it literally is, but also it's not. This is kind of the thing to understand is partial objects aren't parts of objects. It's not that they are parts of a fragmented whole. That's not it. You have to understand partial objects are themselves objects partial. And so there are things that are beyond that step that aren't defined by their wholeness, but instead by quite the opposite, actually.
May I?
Please. No, please. I won't shut up. Anyone can just jump in generally.
One of the things that intrigued me about partial objects, right? Because I'm fascinated by this kind of thing, because he talked about Melanie Klein and how he critiqued Gilles Deleuze critiqued Melanie Klein, her theory about partial objects, right? In the beginning, in the early, back in chapter 1, right? And I want to say that if there's an example about video games, because I like, Theosophy, I understand. I already started with Deleuze, so I already finished Empiricism and Subjectivity, so the second book would be Theosophy, I guess.
Okay, there's the second book is whatever the second book is. I just want to read a little bit from Chaosophy, which is a collection of interviews, essays, other things that sort of are there are other things besides just sort of the main writings of the books, right? And most of it is from Guattari. Deleuze is in here, but there's a handful of bits on desiring machines. I kind of want to just read a little bit because it helps, I think. Desiring machines have nothing to do with gadgets or little homemade inventions or fantasies. Rather, they are related, but from the opposite direction, because gadgets, improvised contraptions and fantasies, are the residue of desiring machines. They have come under the sway of specific laws of the foreign market of capitalism, or under the home market of psychoanalysis. It's a function of psychoanalytic contracts, for example, to reduce states lived by the patient, to translate them to fantasies. Desiring machines cannot be equated with the adaptation of real machines, or fragments of real machines, to a symbolic process, nor can they be reduced to dreams of fantastic machines operating in the imaginary. In both instances, one witnesses the conversion of an element of production into a mechanism of individual consumption, fantasies as psychic consumption or psychoanalytic breastfeeding of sorts. It goes without saying that psychoanalysis feels at ease with gadgets and fantasies, an environment in which it can develop all its castrating Oedipal obsessions. But that tells us nothing of consequence about machines and their relations to desire. The artistic and blah, 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 blah. Sorry. The object is no longer to compare humans and the machine in order to evaluate correspondences, extensions, possible or impossible substitutions of the ones for the other, but to bring them into communication in order to show how humans are a component part of the machine, or combine with something else to constitute a machine. The other thing can be a tool, or even an animal, or other humans. We are not using a metaphor, however, when we speak of machines. Humans constitute a machine as soon as this nature is communicated by recurrence to the ensemble of which they form a part under specific conditions. The human horsebow ensemble forms a nomadic war machine under the conditions of the steppe. Men form a labor machine under the bureaucratic conditions of great empires. The Greek foot soldier, together with his arms, constitute a machine under the conditions of the phalanx. The dancer combines with the floor to compose a machine under the perilous conditions of love and death. We do not start from a metaphorical usage of the word machine, but from a confused hypothesis concerning origins, the way in which heterogeneous elements, partial objects, are determined to constitute a machine through recurrence and communications, the existence of a machinic phylum. When we talk about partial objects, when we talk about where these things come from and how they come from, and again, they've spent most of the book rallying against the idea of looking at the symbolic as anything more than just what it is. These elements themselves are composed of partial objects. They're composed of their machines. They are machines themselves, technical, social, whatever else it may be. There's a bunch of different words. The words are almost meaningless, but they are machines. Understanding them as machines instead of as the totality with which we've assigned to them. And instead of demanding that they were always part of a singular machine, that's the general machine those things are. That is always what they are. Instead, pulling back and understanding the indices, how they're plugged in, how these things feed each other, where they connect to each other. This is the thrust of schizoanalysis at a basic level. That's the thrust of the first positive task, is seeing the connections. But it's done simultaneously as we work to destroy the representations themselves, as if they were themselves things.
In relation to Kant, Deleuze wrote a book on Kant, and would he say that in this context that that there is no a priori? Would he disagree that there is no a priori or noumena as Kant would had posited?
I heard someone jumping in. Oh,
yeah, did you hear what?
Yeah, no, I heard what you said. Yeah. Yes, I did. They actually go out of their way, Deleuze does, to name one of the, desire, libido, isn't just libidinal energy all the way through. There is the recording energy as well, which is noumena. He's very much pulling in and trying to basically, I don't want to say reconcile, but he's building a fucking ton off of what he pulled from Kant, which he already did in Difference and Repetition, but now is finding a way to go, oh, wait, the way that these pieces of machinery work, the way that they operate, this isn't that desire is always simply purely the same exact desire. It shifts its energy. The first synthesis, libidinal. The second synthesis, noumenal, noumena. Then the third is, the miraculating, God damn it. God crap. I know this. It's
Voluptus, I think.
Voluptus, thank you. Voluptuous, voluptus. These are the three steps of desire, but again, they're not three steps. They're kind of all part of the syntheses. But he's very much pulling in that this is where the noumena is, the recording, the habitual. This is where we start to have what you're talking about, and these things show up that we take as almost a priori. And there's a reason for that. It's sort of like a self-justifying machine as we keep going, because when you have that final state where we have a subject, these things seem as if they were inevitable. They seem as though they were necessary, or that they are part of yourself. Like that's as they describe them in even chapter 1. They're like, these are the steps. And so when the subject falls back on, when the BWO falls back on production, when these things control and fall back on, it's quasi-causative. It seems a priori. It seems as though it's always existed. It seems as if it is the stasis, the standard, the baseline. So
you're saying there's a transcendental element there in the desire machines?
Yes, it's all about transcendental sort of. In my, again, I'm probably misstating it, or I'm saying it in a slightly different way than maybe it was intended or whatever. But I see it as excessively so. that it's about all is within the transcendental, that this is all within experience, but it's not the experience of the subject, it's the experience of desire, more or less. And that's this oversimplified way of putting it too. So, yeah.
To my understanding, don't they kind of like invert Kant's approach, where like, I guess if everything is a priori, it would be like
yes. I'm trying to figure out a way to say that because I'm not going to disagree. Like, I think that's what they're doing, but I don't think it's as simple as just inverting. I think they're fucking with it also, but I'm trying to find a good way to say it, and I'm failing very badly, as you can tell. So yes, please, if you have a way to expand on that, I'm open, because the answer is yes.
I'm super unclear on the. I'm super unclear on the Kant. Like, that's, I haven't studied that closely.
We should do a reading of Kant. We should do a reading of his book on Kant. We really should. Fuck. All right. Sorry, I interrupted again. Apologies. Please continue.
Oh, well, I guess just the way that I've heard Kant's three syntheses described was through like hearing E&G's syntheses as being sort of an inversion, that I think like Kant would be starting from the thing and trying to find out how we can perceive the thing. And someone please correct me, because like I said, I don't know this stuff, but then D&G would be starting from like this like really, really molecular level of just like desiring connection. And then after the three syntheses, then you finally get to the thing where you're kind of looking back on that and be like, oh, there's the thing. But it really wasn't there from the beginning. It's there assigned retroactively. But I think Kant may be trying to do the opposite, but please.
Well, so Kant's a priori, and again, this is from my very poor readings of Kant. I do not consider myself a Kant person. I've read them because I read a long time ago and absolutely had no clue what I was doing. And then I've reread them more recently post DNR and more Deleuze, which again is going to give me a bent. So whether or not it's literally what Kant wanted or how it's written is going to be, we'll say, dicey. But for Kant, his element with everything when it came to sort of the a priori things of experience, this transcendental categories, as he sort of talked about it, is part of, but not necessarily derived from experience itself. Kant really played in sort of the transcendental elements come from, I want to say, without or above, you might say, if we're going topologically, because we're about to, because I'm going to go to Deleuze. Deleuze, very differently, for him, desiring production is what generates reality. It is the backbone. And so it's below, and again, below and above are going to be really, really relative terms here. And I'm not being super specific, but like Kant is very much a sort of universalist when it comes to the a priori of everything. Whereas desiring production is not like transcendent. It is constantly shifting and changing. The nature of desiring production now, well, a lot of how it works is generally the same. There are other things that are affecting it and changing it. Chapter 3 goes into how desiring production is fucked with in different ways via different social classes and class systems, where we have the prehistorical system where desire is pretty much kind of immediately consumed, and it's consumed pretty consistently, with a small perversion of it inside of the camps or inside of villages where you kind of have to hold things for later. But it's minor things overall. We don't have in this case, for example, a body without organs as we would be able to talk about it today, or the meta understanding of the BWO. And the king, when he comes, desire shifts again. The transcendental elements come from desiring production through all of this machinery and then back again. Whereas for Kant, it, again, as I understood it generally, these transcendent, what for Deleuze would be transcendental, these a priori things come from sort of without, that they are constant and they are sort of always there. It's an idealist version of it versus Deleuze's empiricist transcendentalism. And that's kind of where they're super close. Like, this is not, they're not like having discussions about both being a hyper idealized plane of reality or some other thing. Like, Kant very much is doing something different, but it's an idealist version of transcendentalism versus Deleuze, who's very much in this space of transcendental empiricism that he pulls from Hume, that he pulls from Kant, that he pulls from a whole bunch of people. So when we talk about like the a priori as a thing, for Kant, it is that transcendental subject that the a priori sits with, which would be above the fold. You might want to say above the fold, above the line, above the setup. Whereas, again, desiring production itself always precedes subjects. And by necessity of that, his a priori doesn't sit with the subject. It sits with desiring production, is created sort of through that process. This is where I see the fundamental difference. But again, well, this Kant, like this is one of the more complex thinkers, and I would not pretend to say that I have a complete view of the guy. I don't even say that for fucking Deleuze, and that's all I've been doing for 5.5 years. So,
in terms of in terms of the axiomization, right? So, does the process of axiomization like kind of like give rise to the symbolization that we kind of or it's located in different spheres? Does the process of axiomization kind of relevant to creating the symbolic sphere?
yes.
Yeah.
So the order of things here is going to be less important to saying that it creates the symbolic sphere, but it's much more about the process of the symbolic and representational space and how we have desire repressed in very particular ways. It's more complicated than I'm about to say. The very complex version that is the simplest of that would be saying, go back through the three socii that they lay out and look at where the displaced representative appears and how displaced repression and the repressed representative show up and how they show up. Because in, again, the prehistoric or under despotism, it isn't that we have like desire free. Desire is not free. Desire is brutalized in every step of the way. This is, again, the opposite of the idea of like the noble savage mentality. It's a horrific existence of pain and tattoos and scarification and pain rituals that if you've never read them, you should. It's amazing stories from these guys about what they put people through and how they put people through. In the I picked up another one, the shift in how circumcision done to younger men as part of a ritual. It hurts. They didn't have anesthetic. Like, pain was used to control, to put desire in its place. As desire makes its move through that, though, it isn't just desire outward. Again, it's not this idealist version of like, oh, it's a fount of desire and it's going out and here's what it turns into. It's like, no, it goes out and then desire is malformed and then kind of falls back on itself because desire doesn't care what's out there. Like, it's not like that, but it exists and desire is everything. So as such, desire is going to be trapped in structures. It's going to be attracted to structures. It's going to find repetitions. It's going to find recordings of desire, habitual things that seem to work, that are burned into it through excessive pain or other things. This type of repression exists. And as time moves, the position of where it sits shifts from one to another. The idea of why you reproduce, where you reproduce, who you reproduce from, who you're related to, what your relationships are, shifts from the tribe and a more fuzzy sort of modular debt system to an infinite debt to a king who's ultimately just a symbolic position. Like, the dude doesn't matter. The person doesn't matter. People live and die beyond kings and still worship kings or rulers that died years before because the person isn't what matters at all. It's the position. But that's weird that is sort of the emergent realization of what these things are. But then the family comes along and lo and behold, we have mom and dad and me, and everything is my relationship between mom and me, not Heather and me, not Brooks and Dexter, but my son and father. And that relationship between those symbolic elements, it's built out of a lot of those same kind of structures, but they're pushed and fucked with slightly. And as that happens, I no longer have, as once was, the reason I have kids is not for survival. The kids I have aren't really how I continue my lineage. Like adoption works perfectly fine. Genetics is such a silly abstraction at that point. So why am I having kids? To have a family, to be a good productive member of society for reasons that are others. But why do kids obey me? Why do they listen to me? They don't have a huge debt-based system of weird debts that they're sort of learning and finding ways to deal with. They don't have a king on high saying they have a father, the father's job. It could be mom too. Sex doesn't matter there. Just the position. Mm-hmm. And then the mother, the object of desire, just the position. But now I have relationships that are defined, that I need to learn what they are and what belongs in these sets of things and how I need to relate to sets of things together. Heterogeneous sets, homogeneous sets, how I blend things together and find them and kind of make them homogeneous by how I weave them together. And suddenly the axiomatic, which is the base of set theory, how sets are determined, this is how one deals with the world. What makes a man, what is a woman, this is about sets. It's not about definitions that are on high from king or God or my weird position in society. It's the sets that are part of this. These are what determine these things. It's the sets. And this is because of the way repression shifts through all of the different social orders that fall back on and continue to control and repress desire. And that's the short version.
Yeah, the long. I know the long version. What it is. Read the book. Read the second book. Different repetition, and I will read it.
It's chapter 3 of Anti-Oedipus does a very nice job. Marry it with Holland's book on Anti-Oedipus and also his book on market communism or capitalist nomadic capitalism, which goes through sort of the social orders of these things and how desire is played with and fucked with on them. It's really great. They're both really fantastic reads. But it's understanding desire goes out, but it's not from you. You are a conduit of desire. The same way that you probably think a wall plug is the fount, like a wall plug would think it's the fount of electricity. The same thing. The computer thinks it's the fount of all of its own creations. So do but you're just a conduit for desire as it's going out. But desire doesn't just go out. It goes out and then runs into other things made by desire and other formations of desire. And then, reacts to them, deals with them, forms around them. And we get what we get. You good, Marcellus?
Yeah. Deleuze mentioned, because we read already, we read this entire struggle of the phallus, this poorly understood will to power. This is an interesting phrasing, right? Anthropomorphic representation of sex, right? Mm-hmm. And where we read that in some of the chapters, right? I don't remember where, but previous chapters, right? Where he said that the non-human sex, right? What do you mean by that? Like beyond beyond the human, right? Or it's kind of like a sociology, there's a sociological baggage to it, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of maybe Godelli, kind of Strauss, I don't know, maybe, but what he mean about this anthropomorphic representation of sex, the whole concept of sexuality, right? When he said everywhere is sexuality, right? You have to understand it's not contained within the symbolic representation of kind of the human, right? There's the non-human element, and you previously said the wasp and orca, right? Or the wasp and I don't know, but there's something beyond that, right? like desire doesn't capture also the human element also, like also beyond the human, right? It doesn't stay in a human all too human kind of way, right? Or maybe I'm wrong.
I think it's going to be a more complex answer than I'm ready to give right now.
Yeah, I'm a Hegelian. I read Hegel, so it's all right.
It's okay.
Maybe...
We still think you're okay. You're okay. One of the things I want to really quick talk about Rudd. How you doing, Rudd? I hope you're well. Rudd says, it's right above Hobbes, so I'm fucking the letters. It feels reflexive to say libidinal energy is a machinic energy, or I'm not understanding the impulse of the libido energy as the system of breaks in material flux. If you're ready for it, this is what I would say is one of the harder parts of all of this. Guattari writes more about this. Kind of at length is about the libidinal energy and how it works, but we're not talking about kind of the old school libido. We're very much not. It's not just about the sexual desire of a dude. That's the human sex that they're wanting to very much get away from. Instead, we want to talk about sort of the shift they're making in how libido itself, well, being primarily sexual, but it's not human sex. For Freud, libido was human sexuality. It was a fuck energy, the drive to recreate, that an individual had a push out and they wanted to fuck. And that's what all it wanted to do, constantly fucking. And the subject necessarily needs to learn to turn fuck energy into other things. So you've got to sublimate, as he called it, or repress. And so this became kind of his core thrust. Here, though, libido isn't sexual in a human sense. That even that is representational. So this is about productive libido, and this is about connections rather than places it resides. The way to think of desiring machines themselves is actually much more that the desiring machine is the thing that produces the real in how it works, and the thing that powers it and is created by the desiring machine and the connection is libido. So it's more often you'll hear them talk about the machinic unconscious, the libidinal, the energy, these things, because ultimately they're really pushing for this productive rather than representational space. It's not really sexual, not human sex, non-human sexual it is, but it's not sexual as we would normally sort of talk around it. But it's a productive, forward, continuous sort of thing happening. So like, it's not about necessarily that libido even represents desire directly. It's not. It's more complicated than that. It's much more complicated than that. So there's a lot there. The answer is you're not wrong to mention it, but it's actually one of the more interesting sort of roads to go down about how they both, and Deleuze writes about this and has many lectures about this as a thing. Because ultimately this thing that it's doing is not taking human form. It's not even related to human structures. In fact, it's not even related to structures really at all, but instead it's this abstract flux itself and the connections or disconnections thereof. Side tangent, it's interesting to interpret asexuals as the autists of libidinal desire. Ace people share having libido, but not in conventional form. I think you could go down that road. It's one of the things they would, my first thought is kind of, what they would say, more or less is, there's no such thing as like an asexual. There is that existence or that being or that series of connections, in the same way there isn't a asexual person. Like there's no such thing as a sexual or an asexual person. That sounds really terrible to say like it's very difficult to use the words, but it's just the same way that there's no such thing as homosexual. There's no such thing as heterosexual. These are the large bodies of the things. And they're the totalities from which we sort of derive these symbols. And instead it's the asexuality itself could have a million causes or a million breaks or millions flux. The contingency of the creation of itself is kind of the thing that someone who is at the end of all of that claims a non-sexuality. It's not that they're not healthy or anything like that. It's the machines that they have making them up. This is how they've interpreted it. There is a play in that way, or they've been interpreted in that way, and they have to find a way to define themselves against what is this sort of heteronormative sexual space. The same way that everyone who's coming up with the joke everyone has about the million genders, well, that's because people are trying to triangulate themselves with society, and they're seeing that they're not that thing. Like, I could easily say that I am a hetero, cis, white dude. I could say that. Everything in my life that I've kind of done mostly has kind of been in that direction. There are exceptions to every rule. There's exceptions to all that, but I could say that kind of thing. But that's not really what I am. That's the end result. That is the thing being produced at this time. But that's as unreal as everything else. Instead, I am all of those things and none of those things. Is there any such thing as a schizo then, if they both share a break in the flux? The condition of being this, the clinical we all have the schiz process. First of all, the schizo, as they're referring to it, as the clinical entity or the person who's unwell or the person defined that way, because they're defined that way against other things. They're defined that way against the production of society. They're defined that way against other elements. I could also say I'm a cisgender black woman. Sure. I mean, this is where you start talking about like, what is the reason we say those things and not? We say those things, we define ourselves as the ability to communicate with other people, to share where we're at and what we are. I'm not a black woman. I mean, I think, but there are experiences in life where everything shifts, where I'm not necessarily a white man either in that moment. These things are not necessarily a totality of experience forced on me continuously. But I have to define myself against others, or tell people where I'm at, or categorize myself for the capitalist class. And as such, the people who are unable to do that, the people who are unable to be productive, the people who are unable to fit in, this is how we name them. This is how we call them these things. They had the little bit ago where they talk about Proust, and it's one of my favorites. I've now brought it up multiple weeks in a row. Proust has a long rant where he talks about that there's no such thing as gay or straight men, because he sees in straight men homosexuality, and he sees in gay men heterosexuality. What does he mean by that? Well, he sees there are gay men who prefer specifically very petite, hyper-femme men. Is that guy like really gay? Or is he attracted to parts that are male and parts that are female, and femininity is a thing? So what is homosexuality? What is heterosexuality? Because the twink guy who's like super femme is attracted to hyper masculine men. So is he more gay or less gay? By the way, this is a thing that you see in the gay community as a conversation too. These things, this is kind of that play. Hetero guys who like big, strong women, they exist. Hetero guys who like tiny, little, petite women who have no breasts, are they purely straight? Proust has this long fucking rant. Again, he calls men who like really petite women pederasts, effectively, which is a extreme statement, but it kind of, again, makes his point. The whole thing is playing with, what does it mean to be these things? Well, none of us are those things, but we're measuring ourselves against a whole. We're presuming the whole. We're starting with the whole, the big object, the total, the whole body. And we're saying that's the thing. And so separate everything else, instead of allowing the partial objects, the objects partiaux, to make their way through. And the gay community has this combo all the time. I've had I've had very interesting conversations with a lot of my queer friends. It's always been really fascinating because, it's you look like me. You're particularized. You're hypermasculine, or you're this. Guys who are bears, they don't want to do that all the time. Like, people don't want to be these things all the time. They don't want to like work themselves into a place that they're, oh, this is what everyone thinks I am, therefore I'm going to do it. People do that quite often, very much. So now imagine that you didn't have a connection to the social world. Imagine that you were schizophrenic or deeply autistic and you didn't have that grasp of what the social space was or how these things work. And you're just trying your best. But the axiomatics of what makes a homosexual, a straight man, an asexual, a normal person, a normal conversation, whatever it is. Now imagine that you don't have that and you're trying. You're really trying, but you're broken. And that broken is only defined as such because it's not producing correctly. In the same way that Prel and cars are produced, Prel and Ford cars, as they say, so society produces the schizophrenic and the autistic. It's the same thing, same production. Our grinder tribe's a technical machine. They're a technical and social machine. Caught. They're a technical and social machine. They actually, very specifically, I was almost about to read this. Guattari starts talking about you want a data thing. This makes me feel like a young man. Once upon a time, you had to call a switchboard to be connected to other people on a phone. You'd call a switchboard and you say, connect me to KL5775, and they'd connect you over. But if you called a number that was disconnected, you'd get connected. And then if other people called numbers that were disconnected from other places, you'd actually get this really weird thing happening where you could kind of hear other people talking. And it was kind of amazing. Randos. Think of it like Omegle with analog phones. I don't know how else to.
It happened to me. It happened to me, Brooks, multiple times.
You got
in Libya.
Libya. Some places would still have this. That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. We haven't had. We've had digital since 2000 and something, I think, and we even haven't had switchboards, I think, since my entire life, I think. But to read from Guattari, because that's what he's talking about, just so you kids know. Desiring machines are neither imaginary projections in the form of fantasies, nor real projections in the form of tools. The whole system of projections derives from machines, not the reverse. Should the desiring machine be defined then by a kind of introjection, by a certain perverse use of the machine? Let us take the example of a telephone exchange. By dialing an unassigned number connected to an automatic answering service, the number you have dialed is not in service, one can hear the overlay of an ensemble of teeming voices, calling and answering each other, crisscrossing, fading out, passing over and under each other. Inside the automatic voice, very short messages, utterances beyond rapid and monotonous codes. There's the tiger. It is rumored that there is even an Oedipus in the network. Boys calling girls, boys calling boys. One easily recognizes the very form of perverse artificial societies or a society of unknowns. A process of reterritorialization is connected to a movement of deterritorialization that is ensured by the machine. Groups of ham radio transmitters afford the same perverse structure. Same with Omegle, same with a whole bunch of other shit these days. It is certain that public institutions are not troubled by these secondary benefits of a private use of the machine in fringe or interference phenomena, but at the same time, there is something more here than a simple perverse subjectivity, be it that of a group. The normal telephone may be a machine for communication, but it functions as a tool as long as it serves to project or extend voices that are not as such a part of the machine. But in our example, communication attains a higher degree, inasmuch as the voices enter into the makeup of the machine, become components of the machine, distributed and apportioned in chance fashion by the automatic device. The less probable is constructed on the basis of the entropy of a set of voices that cancel each other out. It is from this perspective that there is not only a perverse use or adaptation of a technical social machine, but the superposing of a true objective desiring machine, the construction of a desiring machine within a technical social machine. It may be that desiring machines are born this way in the artificial margins of society, although they develop in a completely different way and bear no resemblance to the form of their own birth. In his commentary on the phenomena of the telephone exchange, Jean Nadel writes, quote, "It is, I believe, the most successful and complete desiring machine I am aware of. It has everything. Desire freely works within it, with the erotic agency of the voice as a partial object. The sphere of chance and multiplicity and connects up with a flux that irradiates a whole social field of communication through the unlimited expansion of a delirium or drift." End quote. The commentator is not entirely correct. There are better and more complete desiring machines, but as a general rule, perverse machines have the advantage of presenting us with a constant oscillation between a subjective adaptation, a diverting of technical social machines, and the objective setting up of a desiring machine, yet another effort if you want to become Republicans. In one of the finest texts ever written on the subject of masochism, Michel de Mouzon shows, I'm not going to pronounce that right, I feel bad, Michelle, shows that the perverse machines of a masochist, which are machines in the strict sense of the term, cannot be understood in terms of fantasy or imagination, just as they cannot be explained in terms of Oedipus or castration, by means of projection. There is no fantasy, he says, but this is something totally different, a programming which is essentially structured outside the Oedipal problem complex. At last, a little fresh air in the house of psychoanalysis, a little understanding for the perverse. I like it. It's written Michel D. It doesn't even matter. M-I-C-H-E-L-D-E-M apostrophe capital U-Z-A-N. Mouzon is the only way I can think of saying that. But so grinder tribes are technical social machines and also may themselves be desiring machines, dependent on a whole bunch of other things, which is, I think, fascinating to consider it back then. And yeah, our phones were a giant Euro rack once at one point. That's Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, actually. And there are old stories of these guys doing this. The old break boxes that you could just hold up to the phone and make phone calls anywhere in the world and dial in. Someone called the president is one of the stories. Old freak devices. Yeah, freaking. It's good shit. So, that's a nice solid ramble about all of that paragraph. The lines towards the end here, Michelle with an L at the end of Michelle, or it might be Mich. I don't know. They have Michelle in the text, but fuck. The last line there, one fails to understand the nature and function of partial objects if one does not see therein such elements, rather than parts of even a fragmented whole. As Lawrence said, analysis does not have to do with anything that resembles a concept or a person. The so-called human relations are not involved. And the negative task may deal with the symbolic elements. It does. It's about destroying them. But analysis should deal solely with the machinic arrangements grasped in context of their molecular dispersion. The negative task is about finding those symbolic elements and understanding that they're there, breaking them down, and through that, discovering the machinic indices within, not interpreting them, not looking at them as being parts of wholes. This is not saying, let's talk about your father. Your father used to beat you. Yes, that is related to your father. No. Follow the chain, follow the attractant parts of the desiring production that's happening here. Follow the indices and understand that these things, these partial objects, these pieces of the machines, while the symbolic is there, these pieces of machines are meant to be taken separately. They're meant to be where they're at, and they're meant to be running in that way. And Serge Leclerc is going to be our next dude here. Serge Leclerc is pretty great. And it's a pretty good little section. This is a decently long paragraph. So before I go, questions before I charge forward, thoughts, anything, and then I'll move ahead. I will just yeah. No one's here. Everyone's cool. Everyone's fully grasping everything I'm talking about, and it's entirely, and no one has any problems whatsoever because I'm that good at what I do. That's just not true. But I'll take it. I'll take it. Why not? So then, let us therefore return to the rule so clearly stated by Serge Leclerc, even if he sees this only as a fiction instead of a real desire. The elements or parts of the desiring machines are recognized by their mutual independence, such that nothing in the one depends or should depend on something in the other. They must not be opposed determinations of the same entity, nor the differentiations of a single being, such as the masculine and the feminine in the human sex, but different or really distinct things. It's just saying what they're translating. Why would they do that here? It's literally a literal translation, whatever. Really distinct things, distinct beings, as found in the dispersion of the non-human sex, the clover and the bee. As long as schizoanalysis has not arrived at these disparate elements, it has not yet discovered the partial objects as the ultimate elements of the unconscious. It is in this sense that Leclerc used the term erogenous body not to designate a fragmented organism, but an emission of pre-individual and pre-personal singularities, a pure dispersed and anarchic multiplicity without unity or totality, and whose elements are welded, pasted together by the real distinction or the very absences of a link. Such is the case in the schizoid sequences of Beckett. Stones, pocket, mouth. Shoe, a bowl, pipe bowl, a small limp bundle that is undefined, a cover for a bicycle bill, and half a crutch. Quote, if one indefinitely runs up against the same set of pure singularities, one can feel confident he has drawn near the singularity of the subject's desire. To be sure, one can always establish or re-establish some sort of link between these elements, organic links between organs or fragments of organs that eventually form part of the multiplicity, psychological and axiological links, the good, the bad, that finally refer to the persons or to the scenes from which these elements are borrowed, structural links between the ideas or the concepts apt to correspond to them. But it is not in this respect that the partial objects are elements of the unconscious, and that we cannot even go along with the image of the partial objects that their inventor, Melanie Klein, proposes. This is because whether organs or fragments of organs, the partial objects do not refer in the least to an organism that would function phantasmatically as a lost unity or a totality to come. Their dispersion has nothing to do with lack, and constitutes their mode of presence in the multiplicity they form without unification or totalization. With every structure dislodged, every memory abolished, every organism set aside, every link undone, they function as raw partial objects, dispersed working parts of a machine that is itself dispersed. In short, partial objects are the molecular functions of the unconscious. That is why, when we insisted earlier on the difference between desiring machines and all the figures of molar machines, we were fully aware that they were both contained in, and did not exist without, one another. But we had to stress the difference in regime and in scale between these two machinic species. If you can't tell, it's going to be a complicated fucking section here. If you can't tell, it's a beast. Any thoughts before I dive in? Any things you want me to focus on? Any stuff that's specifically annoying or picking at your brain that you want to make sure we get done? Or Is it a line by line thing again? Because it's a line by line thing again for me.
When he said the two regimes, what's he meaning by the two regimes in the last
So
sentence?
a regime is the. I mean, we use the term pretty regularly. The machine is like a structural system of how things interact. So there's two regimes, molecular and molar, as they've talked about them, but they're not different things. They're not like. I mean, they literally use the term molecular and molar for a reason. When we talk about the molecule of carbon versus a mole of carbon, which is a fucking big bunch of carbon, it's not that like you don't have molecular in the molar, and it's not like the molar exists without like these things come at once. If you have a mole of carbon, you also have a bunch of molecules of carbon. These aren't different things. This is how they're wanting to consider desiring production versus social production, for example. They want us to talk about this for desiring machines versus social machines. This is not that they are, hey, we've got this line of things and it's beginning to end. At some point, here's the end. It's like, no. This is desire pulsing out and experiencing and coming back. And as this happens in tiny bits as well as and at large within structural elements. The structure of the molecular regime and the molar regime are different. And these are the two regimes they have laid out.
It's kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to bring Marx to the conversation, but
no,
anyway.
I mean, it's very Marxist.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Marx discussed about there's some kind of commodities, right? Commodity supply that like form it's kind of like fixed capital, but it's kind of like merge, right? Mm-hmm. Like when he established the distinction between fixed capital and like fixed capital and like fluid capital or like variable capital, I don't know, but like fixed capital and something else, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem is that like political economists symbolize about these things and they lump them together, right? The problem with that is that when you lump fixed capital with the I don't know, I would call it variable capital, we lose the distinction between constant capital and variable capital. So they lump them together, right? So there's some products that, or some instrument of labor, right, that they are incorporated within the commodity, right? So you think that no, hold on, hold on, Marx. Like, do you mean the instrument of labor is only the fixed elements of capital? No, because there's elements like raw materials who incorporated in the commodity, right? And I think that and why we maintain this distinction, right? In the first place, given that fixed capital and variable capital are in the same thing, but they process differently, right? So I don't know how.
Well, I mean, they just equated. So equating labor power and libido is not like a wild ride. Given it in the last paragraph, they literally did that by talking about the worker who leaves his work behind to go fight in a war. That's what they're saying. Effectively, desiring production is labor, the element of labor that we've assigned as the output. Because again, it's intended to be abstracted, and Marx's labor is very anthrocentric, like super anthrocentric. Desire is not. Desire is very much the opposite of that. It's human and non-human arrangements. So again, they're evolving it, but very much. I've always read, and I'm not alone in this. Holland as well, and God damn it, what's his name? Sorry, 2 seconds. I must have it upstairs. God damn it, I must have taken it upstairs already. A great book on Marx and Deleuze. Others equated as well that when we're talking about like labor, labor is sort of an abstraction, but it's like, what is it? Well, it's productive rather than representational. This is like Marx's core critique, is saying it's not about taking the factory, or it's even not even about taking the work. It's about understanding labor as the thing that people are putting into things. And for Marx, it's, a real anthrocentric, conscious productive activity. For Deleuze, it's not a conscious productive activity, though. It's labor is desire under determinate conditions. And so this shift of things there's no reason not to make those connections. Again, Holland does pretty regularly. He's pretty huge in it. To just quote him, Marx argues the abstract theory of labor in general becomes possible in the thought of Smith and Ricardo because nascent capitalism has produced abstract labor in general in reality as soon as workers are separated from means of production and sell labor power as commodity. Abstract labor actually attains real existence under such circumstances because labor has become an interchangeable commodity on the market. Workers themselves have become expendable. The work they do is no longer their own. Concrete objective determination of workers' labor power, its transformation from exchange to actual use value, supervenes only after it has been purchased as a commodity and is set to work on means of production that remains external to it as the private property of capitalists. Blah, 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 blah. So, the historical appearance of abstract labor in reality under capitalism constitutes only a precondition for a universal history, according to Marx, not its foundation. And this is in two senses. First of all, capitalism does not constitute a substantive foundation for universal history because it is different from, not the same as, other modes of production, not other social formation, and it frees labor from objective predetermination, blah, 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 blah. Come on, keep going. Where are you going? Give me to the Marx part. Come on. Give me to desire, you fucker. Come on. Sorry, it's just like he's got this huge section and I wanted to skip a little bit around. God damn it. 2 seconds, sorry. I promise. 1 sec. Maybe not.
Take your time.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Don't worry. I'm getting there. It's painful, but I'm getting there. I promise. Foucault has convincingly shown, here's just a great quote. Foucault has convincingly shown what break, a coupure, a break, a shatter, a crack, a shattering, introduced the eruption of production into the world of representation, just as Ricardo founds political or social economy by discovering quantitative labor as the principle of every representable value. Freud founds desiring economy by discovering the quantitative libido as the principle of every representation of the object and aims of desire. Freud discovers the subjective nature or abstract essence of desire, just as Ricardo discovers the subjective nature or abstract essence of labor, beyond all representations that would bind it to objects, aims, or sources. Freud is thus the first to disengage desire itself, as Ricardo disengages labor itself, and thereby the sphere of production that effectively eclipses representation. And subjective, abstract desire, like subjective, abstract labor, is inseparable from a movement of deterritorialization that discovers the interplay of machines and their agents underneath all the specific determinations that still link desire or labor to this or that person, this or that object, within frameworks of representation. That's 12 pages ago. We read it. So yes, it's very much they are playing towards these things.
I'm watching my 6-month-old right now while reading this, and I don't know, this paragraph, I feel like there could be some stuff to pull out of what I'm watching here. So this towards, like, it only runs up against the same set of pure singularities. One can feel confident that he's drawn near the singularity of the subject's desire, and kind of like later in the paragraph, talking about the difference in regimes. I'm watching my kids connect with these different things in the room, and a lot of them are baby toys because that's what we put out in front of them, and they're grabbing at them, scratching their fingernails on them, kind of like into like the texture and the feel of them in their mouth or their hands, But also if there's like a blanket near them that's or whatever, they'll do the same thing to that. Or if there's I don't know, a Kleenex box or something, they'll do the same thing to that. And I feel like maybe how I could, if you read this paragraph through that, is like, if you're looking at this person who I'm looking at and their desire in terms of like toys, that's you're still kind of like at this polar level, really missing the point. Like it's not actually toys that they're interested in. They don't even know what the fuck that is. They're scratching and biting and licking things, or parts of them are doing that to the things around them. And but also to the point, at the end of the paragraph, that it's not as though the category of toys isn't relevant, because that's what they're interfacing with those things because we give them to them. Like we think like, oh, here's baby toys, like baby needs to play with something, we're gonna give them baby toys. And then there's that like kind of that feedback loop between them, that like maybe a Kleenex box could become part of that box of toys because it's because that's like where how they're connecting with it. But anyway,
no, it's there's Huizinga's Homo Ludens actually goes really nice into this, and I know a bunch of people in video game sort of circles who talk about toys in a very particular way through Huizinga and a handful of others, and they're mostly thought of instead of thinking of them as toys, because you're spot on. A child doesn't give a shit about a toy. Like we have attached to this idea, oh my God, it's a toy. A toy means silly, fun, blah, blah, blah. It's like, but that's not like what a toy really is, especially to an infant or someone so young, because they don't fucking know what the next 6 years are going to be like. They're not like forward thinking. They just know that it's something to try stuff with. That's effectively what a toy is. And this is why kids find toys in everything, from tissue boxes to boxes to fucking rocks, a rock that's an odd shape. Just, they're things to try things with. And there's an odd interaction that's happening when we totalize them, when we create that this is a toy, or they like it because it's a toy, because it's fun, or it's bright, like these things that attract parents to buy a thing far more than a child to really give a shit about it. Because children, again, I'm not the only parent who's had this happen. Most parents have had the experience of buying like a nice toy for the kid, and the kid is more interested in the box and plays in the box, because it's not about the toy. It's about the space of possibility, potential that's able to be experienced and played with, that allow play. To just go right to Huizinga's thesis on it, that if it allows play, that's the thing that is the most interesting. And when we start looking at it, we go, and this is, I think, the paragraph, it's spot on to talk about. They have the example they give: the schizoid sequences of Beckett: stones, pockets, mouth, shoe, pipe bowl, small limp bundle, undefined, blah, 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 blah. You can always like create and establish a link between elements. You can create a platonic solid of sorts for toys, or things that Malloy likes, or fidget things, whatever it is, or because his stones, pockets, mouth is an example, is fidget toys. Like we've got these totalities we can put into, like we can do that. You can always establish or reestablish the link between these elements. There are organic links between organs or fragments of organs that eventually actually do form part of the multiplicity. Psychological, axiological links, good and bad, that finally refer to the persons or the scenes from which these elements are borrowed. Structural links between ideas and the concepts apt to correspond to them. By calling them toy, we've actually totalized them in a really weird way. And we've created other things as not toy, or specific relationships, or a toy. Oh, that's a thing that you have to, and maybe it's a generational thing, but toy is something that adults aren't supposed to have. Like that's, oh, whew, yeah, that's for kids. That's for kids. You buy toys and you're a grown man? Yeah, really? That kind of talk. This is how you end up in that position. that refers to these persons or the scenes from which these elements are borrowed. We're pulling back from that stuff, the structural links between ideas and concepts apt to correspond to them. But it is not in this respect that even partial objects are elements of the unconscious. It's not that even if you don't totalize them and you still go, the partial objects themselves, the edges of the toy or whatever, that's not that those things are part of the unconscious. This is Melanie Klein's idea, was basically to obliterate all symbols and all things into themselves almost multiplicities and partial objects, but that those partial objects themselves were actually the unconscious. And it's like, no. This is because, whether organs or fragments, partial objects do not refer in the least to an organism that would function phantasmatically as a lost unity or totality to come. It isn't that a partial object is a part of a thing. I used to awkwardly talk about this and say, it's partial objects. It's like the edge of your finger you can't name. That's not right, and I should never have said such a thing. I mean, it's you live and you learn. But if I'm presuming the edge of a finger as part of what is this finger to come, or this, again, platonic totality or ideality or representational thing that's always there, this lost unity, I've completely done the same thing again. I'm just doing it from a slightly different position. This isn't as a thing. This is not about any of this. This is completely fucked up. I'm still doing the structure. I'm bringing the structure with me and ensuring I recreate it, even in the partial objects themselves, because that's not quite the partial objects they're going with. That's the Melanie Klein version. Their version is actually the molar functions of the unconscious is actually the thing. The molecular functions, which is a completely different way of considering it. It's the evental functions of partial objects. Molecular evental functions of the unconscious are partial objects. These are the raw things that make up the molecular unconscious, the machinic unconscious. And that's why they're saying, hey, there's a difference between desire machines and technical or social or whatever molar machines. We're fully aware that they're both contained in and did not exist without one another, but the difference in regime and in scale between the two is the point. And that's the thing that they're really driving at. The toys example is a very good example. I'm going to remember that in the future. I probably won't credit you because I won't remember to credit, but I should. It's a very good example.
I
credit my
just
6-month-old.
I just joined here, so I don't know what else I missed, but what I was thinking for like a summary for what was talked about is it kind of like in psychoanalysis, whenever like things become like, whenever you put a label on like all these things as toys instead of like the processes and feelings that they give to somebody, you kind of turn it into a symbol, and the more you reflect off of that symbol, it becomes like a more like perverted form. And that's why in capitalism, capital becomes like such a overwhelming principle. So the reason why we kind of abstract labor into these molecular functions is so that we can kind of realize how it feels to the person, and how like these things become microfascisms and whatnot. And he says, and they become microfascisms whenever we take it as capital instead of like bodily functions. We take it as like that capital is like a natural part of society. For example, people say that capitalism is like a natural thing and that it's inevitable to go back to it. Whenever that happens, we're kind of just perverting this symbol instead of actually thinking about what really happens in the unconscious. So like, is that something that's like going on here, where
No.
it's the difference between like the symbolism of labor versus like the real feeling of it?
No. Significantly different, actually.
Okay.
So they would also argue, just to say it simply, that there is no such thing as a natural organ either. That there is no like bio organ, or there's no like any of that. Because we're not quite at capital in this part, because this is again a function of talking through sort of what can be done in terms of a psychoanalytic or counseling or psychological effort within any person, but how that unconscious functions, especially within capital, but also outside of capital as well. But the function is they're saying, hey, we're starting to understand, and I think CogSci and actually a lot of really interesting, like what you'd more normally call hard sciences, actually really started to back up a lot of these ideas. But the idea is that as we're experiencing the world, we're not experiencing a child, to go back to the toys, because I also once had a 6-month-old. She's 3 now and Dexter's 7. But the existence that they have is not one where they're actually thinking of a partial object. When I see them deal with like the edge of a toy, because I know where it comes from and I know what that toy is and I know where it will be in a few years, I think of them as dealing with a whole toy. But their experience is not that. Neither was mine, neither was my parents. But over time, what happens is I kind of begin to understand things as part of a whole I need to figure out. I need to find things and figure out what the parts are of that whole in order to deal with things in terms of the representational elements. And so over time, I become sort of ensconced within this structure of how those things become whole, or what whole objects are, or what a man or a woman is, or what a worker is, or what anything is. And from there, psychoanalysis and psychology and a whole bunch of other fields basically go, oh, so you are actually ensconced within symbols. Let's talk about how those symbols relate. And they're like, no, stop it. It's not about how those symbols relate. It's also not about parts of those symbols. It's not dad. Oh, you have issues with your dad. Well, let's talk about parts of your dad. Like Melanie Klein. Melanie Klein was really focused on dicks and vaginas. That was like a big deal for her. But we're not even talking about like that level, because penises themselves aren't even a thing. Like to like newborns, that's not, they don't know what that is. They don't know their bodies. They don't know what a body is. But instead, over time, it's about getting to, hey, these partial objects, these molecular functions of the unconscious, as partial objects are connecting and disconnecting, these things are forming. This is the brunt, and there is a lot of them firing off at any given point. This is not like there's one and then another and another, and you're at like in that chain. There is a multitude, an extraordinary multitude of these things firing off, and not at the same time. And they're overlapping, and there's fucky stuff happening and all this stuff. And here you are existing. And so when I start talking to you and I say, you know, I just am having a real tough time because I'm stressed of this, this, and this. Now you can go one of two ways. You can go, oh, you're stressed because of work and money. Did your dad give you a lot of shit when you were younger? You can go that way. That is a way to go. They would say, chase down what it means for me to be stressed. Chase down what it means for me to talk about money. What do I see money as? How do I relate them? And what are the parts I relate? And then continue to chase them, because as you find, and they have the line in here I really like from Leclerc, which is, sorry, I'm just going right back to, one sec. Sorry. I promise I'm normally much more on the point about this. It is not yet discovered the partial objects as the ultimate elements of the unconscious. In this sense, Leclerc used the term erogenous bodies. Where is that line? To be sure, one can always, it's because it's at the end again. I'm terrible. Their dispersion has nothing to do with lack, constitutes their mode of presence in the multiplicity they form without unification or totalization. With every structure dislodged, every memory abolished, every organism set aside, every link undone, they function as raw partial objects, dispersed working parts of a machine that itself is dispersed. And when they were going back through, you can actually see how these things, and you'll see them repeated over and over. That's the line that they have. Actually, that's the Beckett thing. That if one indefinitely runs up against the same set of pure singularities, one can feel confident he is drawn near the singularity of the subject's desire. That's Leclerc, but it's one of the things they're going to agree with. They're indices. This is about attractance of desire, of this libidinal, of part, like how are these things like moving against each other? As you start running into the same stuff, you're actually getting closer to that singularity. You're getting closer to that position, and you can actually work with them. And that's the second positive task. We're only on the first positive task. We've got a whole other book part coming, but that's kind of where they want to start. Break down symbols. As you break them down, you'll start to see repeated singularities, find those repeated singularities, and then step 2, which is coming. And I don't kind of want to jump too far because this book is already complicated enough.
Yeah.
Does that make more sense?
Yeah. Yes. I don't know how I or what I said it as, because I'm on Adderall right now, so it's hard for me to structure my sentences correctly. But for like an example with like listening to music, you would think that listening to music, you like love certain notes like dissonance or whatever, and then like you slowly break that down into like more like abstract forms, and you realize it's something like you love like swells, like these sort of like very abstract forms of experience, like the whatever, or what you were talking about with libidinal.
You're doing, so that process would be the opposite, where you're totalizing and bringing things in. Oh, these things are related. I like them. They're similar because they are swells. Now, that may not be actually what you dig. You don't always dig swells. You dig swells contextually in certain places, but not even really swells. It's these certain notes, but not even those certain notes, because the complexity, and this is to go with like the Nietzschean turn of this, you can't actually get to the why. That's not really the thing that schizoanalysis is even about. Schizoanalysis has a very different tactic, but for Nietzsche, it's the question of like, no one can tell you how a push works. Like, what is pushing? I push you. How does that actually work? No one can explain it. They still can't. Where does it start? Where's the initial? And it's like all of this stuff. What's the cause? These things don't work backwards, but we like to do that. We like to go, oh, here's the 6 things we care about, and therefore this is the cause of the thing. But this is also not accurate as a thing. So their warning would be the opposite. It's, oh, I love rap music. Do you love fucking rap music? Well, not all rap music. Well, okay, but tell me things you like. Well, I like this, this, and this. All right, well, what about this song? Oh, I like this, this, and this. Oh, I'm starting to hear the same stuff. And then you keep poking around those things. Again, this is, and so it's the opposite direction. It's not finding that you like swells. Finding that you like swells and defining yourself as someone who likes swells is the opposite direction. It's undoing.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. So like the final like desiring machine would have to be something that's incomprehensible, something that you can't like turn into something that you can associate with.
I mean, effectively, yes. But again, it's not about getting even to the desiring machines. It's about the indices of it. The same way that very, very complicated computer processors. You don't go through and look at every single transistor. Like, it's not working. Oh, fuck. It's, or this is off firing, or this is wrong. You don't check every transistor one by one. What you do is you sort of go, okay, it's coming out here. Heat is more produced here. That must be the side where it's damaged. These are Machinic indices to find out what's going on and what's happening with the thing. You don't just go down to the next level. You have to necessarily use indices to find these things that are smaller parts of things that we understand. It's much more complex than just pointing as a thing, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, it does.
Okay. And it's not a recording of me playing in the Discord. The user who was just talking, their username is voice message just under 3 minutes. I don't know how else to say their name except for that. It's a very clever username. I hadn't seen it before, but that's so it's not that there's a voice message of me playing. It just looks like it. So Rudd says, it's an old joke about Freudian psychotherapy that goes, a man goes to Freudian psych, says, doctor, my head hurts. Psychiatrist asks, interesting. How's your relationship with your father? Man responds, well, fine. I'm mostly when I'm working on my car. Puzzles him for a bit. Did you work on your car with your father? Well, my head hurts every time I sit up and put my head on the car jack. Interesting. So your father's name was Jack. Yeah. That's a very old, very corny joke, by the way. It's a very old, very corny joke. It's corny as shit, Rudd. I feel like I need to mute you now. That was so corny. That was brutal. I liked it, though, and I shouldn't have laughed. That makes me very corny. I'm corny as fuck, too. God damn it. What can I say? Modest Warfare asks, is this process of learning what DNG would call a strata? I'm not going to say no, but the answer is not a clean yes. And it's welcome to Is this a BWO? No, but I don't want to explain why. It's sort of a strata. It's kind of when we talk about material being organized, like we talk about physical stratum, like the ground, which is what a huge one Deleuze loves to use, rocks and mountains, or plants and animals, or the phylum strata, and these things. It's about the products, which are the organized bodies, the stratification, which goes through the substance being individuated and organized into elements or agents, and then ultimately into products. So the answer is a yes, but it's more complicated than that, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. I'm hoping it makes sense. I want to make sure we get through all the points of this. Now I'm trying to remember where we... let me look through. We actually kind of went through a whole bunch of this shit. It's they have that line with every... Where is it on this page? It's the last couple sentences that I'm gonna repeat myself almost every time saying that. With every structure dislodged, every memory abolished, every organism set aside, every link undone, they function as raw, partial objects, dispersed working parts of a machine that is itself dispersed. The partial objects desiring production is functioning best when it's not part of organized structures, when it's not having to deal with the continuity of memory or the history of that. The idea of biological unity, or that of the organism, which again, the body without organs is kind of the transfer point between the machinic to the organic. It doesn't deal with links very well. Like, these are all repressive elements that push it into particular ways, where desire freely connecting pushes in the ways it goes. These other elements are necessarily repressive, which doesn't always mean bad, but they are repressive. They're repressive. So it's an important distinction there. And partial objects are the molecular functions of the unconscious. It's a fucking great goddamn line. It kind of sets the whole thing up. So, like, ultimately, partial objects are these incredibly independent things. They're not part of larger objects. This is not that they're part of objects. That not deterministically so. These are partial objects. These are all the parts. If you think of the Spinoza substance before individuation, if you go read Rouillé or Simondon, we have a Rouillé reading on the server right now. I highly recommend you read along with it. I highly recommend. We have them on YouTube. You can go find them elsewhere. They're live on the server if you want to join them every week. This is Rouillé. This is fucking Rouillé. And man, they did him dirty. Man, they did him dirty by not mentioning his ass here. But this is the thing he's talking about. This is what they're driving at. This is a absolute challenge to traditional thought across the board, not just like Platonic concepts, but psychoanalytic concepts and all of these elements and psychological concepts across the board. It's wild. And this is the productive essence. This is the thing that's happening at the base of all of it. There. That's it. That's going to be it. And that is a solid 2 hours and my brain is dying. We got through 2 paragraphs. That's pretty solid. What's the next one? Yeah, the next one is, oh no. Yeah, the next bits are going to be running right into each other. And we get to talk about Mozart and the pervert he was. If you didn't know, Mozart, total pervert. Yeah, like his writings, wow. Like literally Mozart was like super perverse. That's why it's always fun whenever like a conservative or right winger is like, classical music is just the perfect. Oh, Mozart. Yeah. And you just make sure you overload them on he was perfect in everything he did. He was certainly not a deviant. And then go read anything he fucking wrote. Just to steal the quote they've got, "Raise your ass to my mouth. My ass burns like fire. But what is the meaning of that? Perhaps a turd wants to come out. A turd. I know you. I see you. I feel you." Yeah, that's Jesus Mozart.
Christ.
That's Mozart. He loved poop. He loved poop. His music's pretty good. but he loved poop.
Yeah.
So it's always fun to bring up. I mean, who doesn't?
Every great
Poop's
artist
funny.
is a freak.
Hey, Walmart managers don't make Thriller. It's the way it works.
Exactly.
It's just the nature of the beast. Also, Walmart managers sometimes do diddle kids too. So, it's everything's everything. Mozart was a
There's
cat
two sides
boy.
to every coin.
I don't know if he was a cat boy. I think he wrote that to his partner wife because he liked her poop, watching her poop. He liked the Shiza videos. But it's, again, they're going to be getting into all this, and it's going to be really fun. Mozart was a cat boy. Jesus fucking Christ. He actually... Okay. Someone posted a link that is... I've got a... Mozart apparently liked to imitate cats. Here's the tale as we know it. That person should be publicly executed for writing that subtitle. That's too much for me. That's too much. That's and here's the tale. See, they even spelled it Tail. Like, don't do that. Like, I appreciate you, but don't do that. Maddie, please, Maddie, no. I must have been playing to Mozart's satisfaction, for he hummed the melody as I played and beat to the time on my shoulders. He suddenly moved a chair up, sat down, told me to carry on, and began to improvise a beautiful variation, everyone listening to the tones of the German Orpheus with bated breath. Can you imagine Mozart like coming up and playing next to you? That'd be cool. Picture's account continues, but then he suddenly tired of it, jumped up, and in the mad mood which often came over him, he began to leap over tables and chairs, meowing like a cat and turning somersaults like an unruly boy. What the fuck, man? I love it. That's fantastic. I love it. And I know about him wearing animal. I didn't know him doing it. It doesn't matter. It's fucking great. He'd suddenly grow bored and leap over mewing and turning somersaults. Jesus fucking Christ. Well, that is how we're going to end our Anti-Oedipus stream today, is talking about Mozart's fecalphilia and cat fetishes. So, pretty cool as far as shit goes.